It is the contemporary Baku, a town which strives to dazzle with its fictitious luxury and shine. Today, even the smallest recollection of those who used to live here as founders of the town and who left an indelible trace on its image is being furiously avoided. The memory is lost of representatives of the nation which became one of the co-founders of the Azerbaijani Soviet Republic. The present rulers of Azerbaijan have made anti-Armenianism a state policy, aspiring to eliminate the memory of the Armenians of Baku and the horrible crime which was committed here in January 1990. And not many can believe today that this town, only some 20 years ago, was drowned in blood, and a bacchanalia of medieval cruelty and vandalism was being performed in the streets. Just 20 years ago. It is really hard to tell what was happening those days in Baku. It is dangerous for the psychological state of a normal human, one used to considering categories of humane and civilized relations between people. In our mercy to the audience, we shall not bring the footage of the most vicious massacres. The main goal of this documentary is to present the truth of the events in Baku in January 1990. We are not pursuing the goal of inflaming the feelings of hatred and enmity, but simply to remain on the pitch displayed by the Armenian people during this and all other ferocious massacres of the Armenians in Azerbaijan.
Я родился в Баку, учился когда-то в Москве и работал в Москве в театрах и прочем. Но с Баку связан с семьей и прочими вещами. А сейчас мне пришлось покинуть, и мне не хочется даже вспоминать этот город.
On January 13th, 1990, after 5 p.m., a crowd of some 50,000 people who were leaving from a demonstration at the Lenin Square, splitting into groups, committed pogroms, destruction, arson, violence, and murders. Izvestia newspaper, January 15th, 1990. A huge mob yelling the slogans, "Glory to the heroes of Sumgait, Viva Baku without Armenians," gathered at a meeting in Lenin Square. At nightfall, pogroms began. They were committed with inconceivable savageness and sadism. The area around the Armenian district became an arena of mass killings. People were thrown out of balconies of upper stories. The crowds were attacking the Armenians, beating them to death. Slogans to oust Armenians out of Baku were voiced during the demonstrations. Anti-Armenian slogans were heard from the crowd, and it was after this that the most horrible events happened. The correspondent of Moscow radio was reporting.
События, которые происходили в Баку, поглотили нас целиком. Мы были потрясены происшедшим.
Many pogroms were committed with a special cruelty. On January 14th, a group of 30 to 40 people stormed into the flat of the Torosians, an elderly couple, where they found two other elderly relatives of the family. The criminals beat them all, grabbed 3,500 rubles, and forced these Armenians and their neighbors out of the town, threw oil on them and burned them. Says Kirill Stolyarov in his book, Breakup. On January 15th, Radio Liberty reported, raging crowds killed at least 25 people on the night of the 14th in the Armenian district of Baku. According to preliminary information, the death toll has reached 25. On January 15th, the pogroms and violence in Baku continue. The death toll of the clashes over the last 3 days reaches 33, according to preliminary data. However, this number cannot be considered final, as not all the flats in Baku where the pogrom makers had been to are counted. Izvestia newspaper, 16 January 1990. Lenin Street, one of the central streets in Baku, was flooded with blood. A Russian living in the Azerbaijani capital recalled with horror the scenes of atrocities against their neighbors, who were fired at point blank, thrown out of balconies, burned alive, or dismembered by raging crowds of Azeris. Those are most remorseless murders. They were attacking men and women, young and elderly, simply because they were Armenians. Being an Armenian in Azerbaijan meant to be sentenced to death, the Radio Liberty correspondent reported. On January 16th, 64 cases of pogroms in flats were identified when Armenians became the victims. In the Lenin district of the capital, 4 burnt, unidentified bodies were found. Izvestia newspaper, January 18, 1990. On January 17th, 45 pogroms and arsons of residential houses in Baku were committed. Izvestia newspaper, January 19, 1990. On January 18th, Russian poet David Samoilov made a note in his notebook. The atrocities in Azerbaijan are shocking. My thoughts are only about this.
Девочку изнасиловали.
Yeah, that's your 3-year-old kid.
Мужчин топтали вот ногами. Сапогами на горло давили сапогами.
Я не хочу быть Азербайджаном. После этого мне больно в сердце принадлежать к этой нации.
The unprecedented sadism of Azeris and inactivity of law enforcement bodies was testified to by even one of the leaders of the People's Front, Azerbaijan, Etibar Mamedov. I myself witnessed the murder of 2 Armenians near the railway station. A crowd gathered, threw petrol on them, and burned them, whereas the regional militia division was only 200 meters away with some 400 to 500 soldiers of the internal forces. The soldiers passed by the burning bodies at a distance of some 20 meters, and nobody attempted to circle the area and disperse the crowd. Novaya Zhin newspaper, 1990, number 5. From TASS reports, on January 19th, unrest and pogroms were going on, which resulted in casualties. The number of Armenians killed in Baku last week has already surpassed that of the victims of Sumgait. This new tragedy is the direct consequence of the authorities' attempt to silence the first one. From an article, Burning January, by Andrei Prolnikov, Moscow News, January 21st, 1990. Those days, the genetic memory of Armenians insistently testified. This is the same genocide, the same mode, the same butchers.